So this evening we will be running through the 5 steps to maximising your practice's profitability in 2025. So we've got Dan from Hive, Simon from Patient Plan Direct, and also Jonathan from Christie & Co. So I will hand over to Simon here to give us a bit of a brief run through of what we'll be covering this evening.
Yeah, thank you, Jodie, and thanks everyone for taking the time out of your evening to join us. A special shout out to Jonathan this evening, who I know is made up of cold, so but still made of gritty northern blood and joined us. A few hot toddies on board, so thank you, Jonathan. And yeah, look, what we want to do is just run through this evening, where we'll put a little bit of context around the market conditions currently, but importantly, Dan's going to touch on some important pointers to understand as a practice owner, or if you're an aspiring practice owner, some of the sort of KPIs and metrics and points you should be aware of to assess where you are today. Clearly, it's just so important to be able to, in any performance-led business, just to be able to measure things. So we'll touch on that. And then we want to just pick out some real actionable points to create a platform for success. So we've picked out 5 actions to create the most impact in today's market. So I'll not spoil the party too early, but just touch on them really briefly. So the first is about owning your leads. So, you know, it's all well and good just generating leads, but actually how to convert them and manage them and have quality over quantity is really important. So we'll delve into that. We'll then go into looking at commercial control. So another way to sort of position that is a lot around the importance of cost analysis in your practice, and some tips around how best to do that. We'll then look at leveraging technological tools. So there's a lot of new technology that's come into dentistry. It's just how you actually use that we'll get into detail on that. Understanding good revenue from bad revenue. So I think a lot of practices, certainly as a plan provider, we tend to find that a good example of this is that in some mixed practices, it can often be private revenue that's propping up NHS revenue. So we'll get into the realms of that and explore that in a bit more detail. And then the final one, innovate value delivery methods. So here we're just going to talk about the costs of opening a surgery, the running costs of that surgery, how to make that profitable in leveraging resource in the most effective manner. And just as a little bonus, I will, if you are a practice, or if you're in a practice and you already have a plan in place and you work with a plan provider, I'm going to give you a little bit of a market insight and give you a means of reducing your plan costs without doing anything. So we'll wait till we get to that bit. But without further ado, that's my cue to hand over to Dan to jump into some of this. But before we do, sorry, it'd just be really good to get a feel for who we have in the audience this evening. So I think Jodie's going to launch a poll just now. And if you could just let us know whether you are a manager, principal, associate, then the poll should be pretty self-explanatory. So yeah, I'll let Jodie just launch that and then hand over to Dan thereafter.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon. We do already have a few results in, actually. So by the looks of things, have a look at the results. I will share those now. So we've got a few practice managers with us, and then the majority of people, so we've got 44% of people are mixed practice owners, roughly the same percentage of private practice owners, and then we have NHS practice owner as well. So we've got a nice spread of people there today.
Good stuff.
Perfect.
You're done.
Great. Thanks for the intro, Jodie and Simon. So just to give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about, we're going to start with some market context and some theory. So it was a bit of a challenge because you've got to make webinars sound interesting. So we thought if we kind of had a digestible 5 steps to maximize your profitability, it's something that people will be interested and want to turn up for. Now, the problem is with kind of anything of this sort, it can be a bit generic, and kind of not really mean anything to your business. You know, we could say find more new patients, increase your margins, grow revenue, and ultimately make more money. Now, they're all true and they're all useful, but without context and how you bring them into your own business, it's not useful. So in an effort to make it useful, you're going to have to bear with us to give a bit of context and a bit of theory, and then kind of our thoughts on how you do a bit of a check as to where you are today, how in control of the business you are, and kind of where your priorities might be. We're then going to go through the 5 steps for transformation in a bit more detail. They're not really in any order, but they're kind of 5 things that if you could complete maybe 1 or 2 a quarter over the next year, or make them focuses for the business, I do genuinely believe it will transform your dental practice. And then what Jonathan's going to do at the end is kind of show you how you actually lock in value in your business today, building towards an exit. So again, it might recontextualize everything we've gone through at the start of the session. So hopefully it's a bit of a journey. Bear with us, and please ask questions as we go as well. And if you think I'm talking nonsense as well, please raise a hand, let us know, and hopefully we'll have an interesting conversation about from there. So where's the dental industry today? It's safe to say over the past 5 years, it's kind of radically matured. It's still a fantastic industry to be in. So at Hive, we only operate within dentistry, and it's incredibly buoyant. The demand for dentistry is kind of as high as ever. What has made it difficult is kind of mainly economic changes, but also kind of cultural changes as well, I suppose, that cascade out from the economic changes. So broadly speaking, I've been in dentistry for about 12 years, and for the first part of that, it was fairly straightforward. In an advisory capacity, you know, you could get someone to kind of make 1 improvement a month and it would have a massive impact on their business. And that could be as simple as invest in marketing, drive more volume to your business, and reap the rewards that come along with it. Broadly speaking, it's not that simple anymore. So the way I sometimes analogize it is, anyone can rock up to a 5-kilometer run on the weekend. You don't really need to train for it. You're going to make it round. You don't really need the right kit. You don't need to think about your diet. Kind of dentistry over the past 5 years has crept into kind of marathon, possibly ultra marathon territory, where you really do need to be thinking about your diet. You probably need to be thinking about your sleep too, and certainly thinking about your kit. So it's not that the rules have changed. It's just the consequences of not performing well on multiple factors are more immediate and more damaging. So you could be doing things wrong in the past, kind of get away with it broadly, and still get a pretty decent commercial outcome, very roughly speaking, because dentists are well paid for the job that they do. I think, you know, I meet new practices every week, and I think everyone's kind of aware now that the game is tighter, but it's still a fantastic industry. It's just you do need to be working on the business way more than ever. So I'm going to elaborate on what I mean by that with some specifics. But it definitely is a case of making a choice between a fantastic job, I believe probably one of the best jobs you can have as an associate, where you're paid 40 to 50% of the revenue that you generate, which is an amazing deal in an amazing industry, or being a business person and kind of having to talk to people like us and figure out how to optimize your business and that type of thing. So this slide here, I think a few of you will have seen before, but it kind of illustrates that a rising tide lifts all ships. So you can kind of see that, you know, from 2009 onwards, there's been this trajectory upwards, where it's kind of the market GDP spend on dentistry has gone up 4 times. So it's not every practice is 4 times as big. Some are 10 times as big and some are still the same. But it was very, you know, it's a great time to be in the industry and just kind of raise with the increased demand and increased awareness of what dentists could ultimately provide for you. So obviously, you kind of look at 2020 and 21. We don't have data beyond that. It definitely has come back stronger. Unfortunately, we don't know by how much. but that was obviously external factors that caused that change. So it has come back stronger. The demand digitally is more or less exactly the same. So the search volumes for dentistry have gone up, are consistent. Probably the difference now is all of us are more discerning with how we spend our money. Everything is more expensive. So you have to be significantly better to get that patient to choose you and your practice ultimately. So this is a slide that we used to use quite a lot because it was very, very relevant back in the day when a lot of practices were principal-led and didn't really know about profitability, and we wanted to kind of teach them, teach them what the pathway might be to getting a kind of return on the investment as opposed to a return on their labour. I wanted to put it in this evening because I think it kind of really illustrates the challenge that we're in with dentistry. So bear with me as I talk through it. On the vertical axis, you've got clinical time, so the amount of time as a principal you're spending clinically in the business. On the horizontal axis, you've got profitability. It's not an exact science, it's more just so you can conceptualize it. So in the top left-hand corner, we've got a busy fool. So it's not meant to be derogatory, but it's not unheard of a principal working incredibly hard to subsidize their own business. So I know Jonathan will see practices like this where the principal is working 5-6 days a week just to cover costs, just to make sure everyone gets paid. And essentially the check they might take home is as if they'd been paid as a 20% deal as an associate. It does happen, and it's happening more and more. So often our first step with working with a client was to move them to getting paid by an associate, which, you know, if you're a business owner, probably isn't a surprise to you that actually it's good to get paid fairly for your dental work. But I think a lot of people that maybe haven't had a practice before would be surprised to know that actually associates are often better paid. So the next step is kind of bringing them down into the investor box. And I'd say you can say you're in the investor box when there's a true profit of 10% plus in the business. So you're getting a decent return on that business, and it's not solely reliant on your labor. There's a lot of good things happening in there. And the unicorn box kind of isn't on us to create, it's more on us to identify. So it's on profits above 20%. And it's usually, we get the opportunity to work with a lot of fantastic businesses, and sometimes they just deliver dentistry in a certain way that's very clever, that increases margins and creates happy patients and gets great dental outcomes. We didn't come up with that, but we can say that's really great, do more of that. So the thing to be aware of here is this line between fool and associate has gone much further to the right. So it's much easier for you now, if you're not of a certain scale, to be subsidizing the business of a principal. And whereas we used to say that point might be £1 million of revenue, it might be nudging towards 1.2, 1.3, depending on a few factors where you can find that true profitability. So it's important for you to think about where you want to be. So it's not necessarily bad to say you'd like to be a smaller business, but then you have to recruit accordingly, and kind of spend accordingly and make sure you're in the right size premises so you can find the margins. So yeah, kind of reflect where you are in that space. Next slide, please. So how do we create future value, and what's the kind of trap, I suppose, of dentistry? So I know a few of you in the audience have seen this before, so bear with. I do think it's really important, and I do think it's really important for when we're appraising which of the 5 steps is the right one for you to start with. On the vertical axis, we've got time for you to get paid for something that you do. On the horizontal axis, it's the complexity of how you get paid for that activity. So bear with me, it'll make sense as we move through. In the bottom left-hand corner, we've got fee generation. So in a dental practice, the fee generation that happens is dentistry. It pays you immediately, so the time to value capture is immediate, and the complexity of how you get paid is very simple. So someone comes in, you do a load of fillings, they pay at the front desk. So it's not only immediate and simple, it's also very predictable and very lucrative. So for that reason, most of the attention in dental practices, quite rightly, was on generating those fees and doing dentistry and how can we do more dentistry. Now, we always made the argument that any business that's kind of led by fee generation and a principal just doing a lot of dentistry has a natural ceiling, and depending on the type of work the principal does, it kind of is anywhere from £600,000 to, you know, sometimes £1 million if they do implants as well. But there's still, you know, there's still a cap on it, and there's a cap on the profitability of that organization. So we always said you should work on these other things, whereas it was maybe optional 5 years ago. I don't think it's optional now. So the next layer out is operations. So I'd like to delineate here between administration and operations. So administration is everything that happens in the business to allow the dentistry to happen. Operations is a kind of proactive process of appraising real-time information, making changes to how things happen, and hoping it increases margin. So at the end of every year, the time to value capture, there's more profit. So it kind of takes a year for good operations to manifest in future value. The complexity of that is significantly higher because you're not dealing with a patient coming in with specific dental need that you're fulfilling and they pay at the front desk. You're actually dealing with lots of different things, and you're trying to simplify it, make sense, take ownership of it, and make changes which increase future income and future profitability. The next layer out is strategy. So the time for you to get kind of true payoff for strategy usually is about 3 to 5 years. It's usually an asset value, and the complexity here is significantly higher because you're not just looking in at the business anymore. You're looking out at the marketplace. You're coming to things like this. You're looking at other industries. You're looking at technology. You could be looking at anything. And what you're trying to do is make sense of it all and bring it into the business, which kind of creates that future value for the business. So there's a huge disconnect between being strategic and actually seeing the reward. So it's very easy not to do it. And the final layer out is leadership and culture. So I think this is actually way more understood in dentistry now, and there's kind of much more talk about it. I always say it's a bit crude to say it'll pay you in 10 years' time, as the graph illustrates. It's more of the thing that'll make it enjoyable and worthwhile and go a lot better if you're consciously thinking about what type of leader are you, what type of leadership team have you got, and how do you bring your wider team along with you. The returns will be much better and it'll be much more enjoyable. And the complexity here is significantly higher because you're not just looking in at the business, out at the world, but you're also trying to reflect inwards and see what you're kind of bringing to the party. So throwing all that information out there, that's quite heady stuff. So what do you need to know today to kind of get a hold of your business, and so you can start thinking strategically and start thinking what's important to you? So I like to use the word obsess, which I think kind of has a negative negative connotation to it, but I do genuinely think it's the right word. You know, as a business owner, you are an entrepreneur, and if you're obsessed with these things, you're going to get better outcomes. So number one, top of the list, are you profitable? So you should know this, and that's true profitability after you've been paid for your dentistry. So the reason I say that is what you get from your accountants is prepared for HMRC, it's prepared for the tax man, it's not prepared for you, the entrepreneur. So what you need to do is re-engineer that P&L essentially, and make sure you're paid a market rate for your associate work, and that'll tell you if you're profitable. So that's a really decent benchmark for how successful the business is. It'll also help Jonathan give you an idea of what the business is worth and any areas that you can optimize. The next thing, well, it's probably the first thing I like to know about any business is the ADY. So that's the average daily yield of a business. So that's how much how much is revenue is being generated per clinic per day. So the average daily yield of the associates. So it's one stat that if I know, you can tend to know if the practice is profitable or not. So, you know, half jokingly, if I told you someone ate 10,000 calories a day, imagine in your head what they look like, you can make a prediction. If I hear that a practice has £3,000 ADYs, it gives me an idea of their profitability. If I hear they have £1,000 ADYs, it gives me another picture. So it's a really important stat. So I recommend every month on your associate pay slips, you take the amount of revenue they generated, the total amount, divide it by the days they worked, and put it on their pay slip. That's their average daily yield. and start speaking to them about it. Weekly inquiries and weekly new patients. So this is lead management. We're going to talk about it a bit further. The reason I say weekly is I think generally reporting on sales elements in dental practices isn't the best. And if you wait till the end of the month, it becomes a much bigger task. And the data, no one's confident in the data. So whoever is responsible for reporting on the leads in your business or inquiries, same thing broadly, needs to be, I believe, documenting them in real time. And probably my gold standard would be at close of play on a Friday or a Saturday, circulating the lead data for the week. That will make it very simple at the end of the month to do a kind of bigger report, and you'll basically see how good you are at converting people who are interested in buying dentistry from you. Conversion to plan. So this is really important. So if we're looking at the life cycle of a patient, it's great, it's great if you bring someone in and they get a high value treatment done, or they get a lot of dentistry done. But ultimately what we want is for them to join a plan and become good patients that refer their mates, really love what we do, and keep coming back. That doesn't happen by itself. So I believe it should be an area of focus that you should have data on and should be talking about with the team a lot. Marketing investment is, it maybe a while ago, it was a bit more generic how you could approach marketing. Broadly speaking, invest in pay-per-click advertising, invest in SEO, and try some different social media channels. More and more, it's more and more competitive and thus more expensive, but also we do see some stuff that's not so great, basically some marketing execution that's not fantastic. So whereas it might have been a case where you could just pay for it in the past and hope it goes well, someone needs to be engaged with it, and you need to be working with your agency and really understanding what you're investing in, how well it's working, because it's quite easy to be blinded by, this post got 10,000 impressions, and that might be great, but how much revenue did it deliver to the business? And that's the conversation that it's not easy to get to, that you need to be having with your agency. So there needs to be an obsession over what are we investing in, what is it delivering us, and what's the kind of logic behind the strategy that we're following. And the final point is the cost to open a surgery. So this doesn't need to be worked out all the time, but maybe every 6 months to a year. But it's the cost of everything apart from the associate to open a surgery. So it kind of gives you a steer on the speed bump you've got to get over to get to profitability. So it's kind of odd, really, but across the UK, the average cost to open a surgery for a private practice is about £650. And that kind of doesn't matter if the practice is in Norfolk or in Leeds. There's, for whatever reason, the cost to deliver dentistry seems fairly constant. Now, there are some outliers, so I've seen ones as high as £1,200, and I've seen some as low as £300, and maybe there's more of an NHS element in there. But it's a stat you should know and be thinking about all of the time, because going back to the ADY, if it costs you £650 to open the surgery, and the associate's only generating £1,000, and you're paying them 45%, you're making a loss in that surgery. So that is money out of the till. So yeah, they're the points. So I'm going to run through the 5 areas of focus that Simon alluded to at the start. So what we're trying to do with these, you don't want to do them all at once. I try and pick out what you believe is your priority and focus on that, and build your kind of strategic objectives of the next quarter. What are you going to do to achieve these? So owning your leads. I see a lot of dental practices, and well, I think every business could get better at their lead management, but specifically it's an area where it's so ripe for optimization, and there's so much work that can be done there. But because dental practices tend to be set up as dental practices, it's quite hard to break the inertia, because of it, the classic thing is, if the phone rings and you've got a patient there, what do you do? And that's legitimate. And we've also had 20 inquiries this morning, and we've had a busy front desk. So you've got to figure out how you service that. So there's a number of options. You can take the phones off the front desk. You can use offshoring. You can have a dedicated person, but the point is it's not going to go away. If you imagine a call, if a lead comes in and you deal with it straight away, it's very different than if you dealt with it in an hour. Like that time lapse, it seems like you're doing the same thing, but you're not. It's like if you saw a tray of sushi and it was beaming sunlight outside, it'd be great if you ate it straight away, come back in an hour and you might want to avoid it. And that's how leads go old very quickly. So what I recommend you want to see is weekly lead data, that you're very confident in that data, and setting objectives for yourself that are reasonable. So if it takes you 24 hours to reply to leads, generally try and drop it to 12. If you're dealing with them within an hour, try and drop it to 15 minutes. And if you're dealing with it within 15 minutes, I try and get it to 5 minutes. I know a squat that's opened recently, and they've had campaigns running for a few days, but because the principal is on it and obviously wanting to get patients in, within 3 days they had 10 new patients booked in. So it kind of shows what happens if the attention and obsession can be put towards leads.
But I think on that, Dan, as well, there's so much, we come across so many practices where there's just a focus on, you know, spending more money to generate more leads, and they're a little bit perhaps not focused on the quality of that conversion and really identifying that patient journey. And I think we all know that there's nothing more annoying than when you make an inquiry and somebody doesn't get back to you. We've had it in multiple sectors.
Well, this is the problem, Simon, that, you know, we've all got these things, so we can go online now and order a 5-man tent and it'll be with us tomorrow morning off Amazon. So our expectations of what services we should be able to get are through the roof, which is okay. You know, like that's the game we are playing at the moment. But understanding, so if you're hearing from your team that every one of the leads says we're too expensive, you're not too expensive. There's something wrong that is happening in that experience, and it's your job to kind of turn over stones and try and get the information to see where it's falling down. So you might have to listen to your call recording and all of these different things. But if you get obsessed with how those leads are being managed, I guarantee no additional expense, you will get significantly better outcomes. On the commercial control front, so this is about cost control to some degree, but also kind of understanding the commercial kind of story and strategy of the business. So a classic one, and I'm sure Jonathan will touch on this later, but you know, wages in a business, sometimes proportionally wages are too high. But if you know you're on a growth trajectory and you're gearing up for growth and it's really hard to recruit people, then maybe it's okay to be a few percentage points high. But it also puts pressure back on you to know we do actually have to deliver the revenue growth as well. So it's kind of it's a evolving control that you have to have an understanding. Like I said before, you should definitely know your profitability. You should know the cost to open a surgery. You should know the average daily yields, and probably your practice manager should be just kind of checking the P&L at least quarterly, but probably monthly, because, you know, materials can sometimes get a bit baggy and things like that as well. It's interesting that no one really used to want to talk to us about profit. It was a bit boring for people, I think. It was only ever when they were building towards a sale that suddenly, you know, £1,000 saved might be £8,000 on an exit or £7,000 on an exit, that people got really interested in working out those percentage points. So it's owning the kind of financial narrative of the business and then making sure there's a plan for everything to get it in line ultimately.
Perfect, thanks, Dan. We've just got a question jumping back to lead management. When they make multiple inquiries, what do you do
about that? So if someone's really keen to book in for dentistry, well, I can't see the question. Sorry, Jodie.
The question just says the leads make multiple inquiries, so what do we do about that? I guess that it's probably about the recording of the leads.
Yeah. So how do you track it? I would class it as one lead in their first port of call. So good reporting, and I think this is why people get hung up on reporting. is as much of an art as it is a science. So it will never be absolutely perfect, but what gives us the most useful information? So when you're sat in your monthly sales and marketing meeting, you might say this chap inquired 4 times. His lead point of inquiry was this advert that we were using on Instagram. So that's the most useful data point, because that's what initiated the first contact. The fact that he then may have been retargeted, it's great because it says everything else is working, and you can say that he's probably really keen to get whatever work done that he's inquired about. But yeah, I'd class that as one lead. So yeah, it is definitely the challenge of reporting. What is the useful data? What's telling us the stuff that we can then make decisions on going forward?
Perfect.
Hopefully that's useful.
Also, just come back to say, if the same person is inquiring at multiple practices.
They may well be. Well, assume they are, and on based around different treatment modalities, Invisalign, they probably are. A lot of implant cases will get referred to someone, and because it's such a big investment, they'll go, well, I best shop around. So people will look around. For Invisalign, it is weighted on price because it's been commoditized, which is the clever thing that Invisalign did by being a standalone brand. Implants isn't done on price. It's definitely done on, are they comfortable with you doing kind of significant surgery on their mouth? Not that, and I'm not saying you should just compete on price in Invisalign. It has to be within your specific kind of proposition of the business, but that'll be a big tangent I can go on. But people will shop around for the high value treatments, and they may, like Simon said, if someone's how often do you think, if you haven't got a dentist, how often they think you have got to go to the dentist? They might see an ad and they'll go, I'm just going to book in now. If they don't get a response quickly, they probably will go somewhere else because they've got it in their head that they now want to go to the dentist, which isn't a kind of driver that comes around all the time. So that's why you have to take them out of the market as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. We just have another question. So I'm finding that leads from Google ads are not that good. Would you say that word of mouth is the best, and marketing companies are capitalizing on dentists?
I would say, I'm going to draw a really great pie chart here. So any kind of lead pie chart, that many should be about word of mouth, and that could be 10 new patients or it could be 300 new patients. So what I mean by that is word of mouth should be always one of your biggest channels if you're delivering a great service. They're the easiest to convert because if your friend refers you to something, you kind of feel more comfortable to trust whoever's doing it. What you're trying to do at a higher cost and at a much lower propensity to convert is put more volume in. So yes, there are definitely, I wouldn't say the agencies are taking advantage, but it's very easy to burn money unless you're doing it correctly. And we do sometimes see things which aren't deployed correctly. So it's massive budgets, and there's a big risk because if you don't manage your leads well, you won't get any return for it, basically. But it might cost you. Probably the cheapest lead you can get or cheapest inquiry you can get should be less than £15 from a Google ad to get an inquiry for general private dentistry. So let's be kind of conservative with it. 1 in 3 of those should really book in. So it might cost you £45 to get a patient in the chair. Average new private patient should be £500 to £1,000. That stacks up for me. And if you sign them up to the plan, then what's that? £200, £300 a year. So there's kind of, you have to get a lot of touch points right, but I'd say it's absolutely right to be investing in marketing, but it's certainly not the panacea that's going to grow the revenue. And absolutely do everything you can to encourage word of mouth.
Yeah, so what you just said links quite closely to another question we've had. So how many front desk staff should there be in proportion to the clinicians in the practice to ensure leads are followed up and existing patients are catered for well? Is there a formula for this? There's no point spending on marketing if follow-up is not working.
I agree with the, well, I agree with the final point. I can't give a specific answer. I can give an example of a practice I know that gets between 500 to 700 inquiries a month, and they have a dedicated team of 4 who are working those leads and existing patients going through treatment. So they've geared up, they've embraced marketing, they've embraced sales, and they're, you know, very, very good at what they do, and they only do a limited amount of treatments. But they're fully aware that those 4 people can't be doing anything else. They just work the leads. So that's a huge amount of leads. I wouldn't, weirdly, I wouldn't be basing it off the amount of associates. I'd be basing it off the amount of inquiries plus the amount of volume through. And there isn't an exact formula, but do drop me an email. And Jodie, if you want to put my email in there, and we can have a conversation about maybe getting a bit more specific on that as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's all the questions for kind in.
Cool. So leveraging technological tools. So a bit like I said, marketing's not a panacea. Technology is certainly not a panacea. It is a tool that can help you go significantly faster. So you could put me in Lewis Hamilton's car and put him in a Vauxhall Astra, and he's still going to beat me around any track in the world. So I've got a better tool on paper, but he's better at driving. He could probably beat me on a bicycle as well, because I'm a really bad driver. But that by the by, a lot of people invest in technology, which I agree with, but don't understand that the actual job is ahead of them post the investment. So the classic example people give is getting an iTero scanner. Completely logical decision. Your sales will go up if you scan every patient who comes through. Problem is, sometimes it's not enforced that every patient has to be scanned. So it's just an expensive piece of technology that hasn't become a tool. So there's loads of stuff in dentistry on at every layer that you can engage with, but it's engaging with it knowing that it's not going to solve the problem right away. It's giving you the opportunity where you can up your service and kind of enhance it and start to solve future problems. So, you know, there's on the lead management side of things, there's a technology that's coming in, software that's coming in from the United States. So hopefully it's going to launch soon, which kind of analyzes inbound phone calls and kind of appraises them and then tracks the leads through the system. If that's anything like it says it is, it's transformational for the industry. But even if it's great, you'll have to figure out how to get buy-in from the team, or it'll just be a massive pain. Next one. So understanding good revenue from bad. Inherently, an NHS contract doesn't make you any profit, or doesn't necessarily make you any profit, I should say. So your job is to kind of appraise whether is this contributing, or is this, you know, it looks good. It's a £500,000 contract. I get, you know, £40,000 every month. That's great. What would I do without it? But sometimes you'll look at it and it might actually cost you £600,000 to service. And that's what we're trying to figure out. So, you know, Simon's company is very much geared up to helping you analyze it and then saying what it could look like if you converted to private. Equally, even within the plan world, you know, there's plans that are all you can eat. I can say without looking at it that you're hemorrhaging cash by servicing those, or you're not servicing the patients, which, you know, I'm not a clinical guy, but that doesn't sound particularly good either as well. So it's really knowing what you've got, all these income streams, which ones are contributing, and then do more of the ones that work. And I would definitely think about moving away from ones that don't work so well. So innovating new value delivery methods. I alluded to it earlier that the cost to open a surgery is kind of the same-ish across the country. So the cost of delivering dentistry is the same. So there's been very little innovation in how dentistry is delivered to increase margins. Now, some practices have done it and done it fantastically. So, you know, people using dental therapists really, really well. And a bit like the technology thing, you can't just recruit a therapist and go, well, hopefully this is going to increase our margins. It's how do we kind of integrate it with our workflow? How do we engage the team to understand it? How do we incentivize the associate to know that that's a good thing to use the therapist? But I think there's so much space in dentistry to kind of innovate how it's delivered. Basically, because the disruption has come, it's tighter, it's commercially tighter, and now it's the time for us to kind of get kind of creative and figure out how we do better. But this also could be with looking at your reception. So if you haven't got space for a business hub or you can't recruit a TCO, I've got clients who are offshoring their TCO function. Again, it's not a perfect solution, but it's something they're trying that hopefully increases their margin and increases their performance and increases the customer experience. So there's a lot of work to be done here. So this might not be the first thing I'd say put on your list. Well, yeah, actually, there's a reason this is 5 and leads at the top. If you're going to look at one thing for the next quarter, I promise the best return is really getting on top of your leads and understanding what's happening. And the, you know, kind of in the back of your mind, just be thinking about what you could do to innovate how you deliver dentistry to create better future value.
Thanks, Dan. We just had another couple of questions pop up. So my past experience with NHS is that it undercuts private. How can you work with NHS income stream?
It definitely can. So every mixed practice is different. I know that you can't, when you're recommending private dental treatment, you can't say that this is a better treatment and this is a worse treatment. So there's a big case that you kind of operate, you're swimming with one arm tied behind your back, which is why if you're in a mixed environment, I would definitely have a chat with Simon about how well is your NHS list working for you, and is it worth converting? Because yeah, the other marker to have in your mind, if you've got a £5,000 NHS contract, that's quite a lot of patients coming through the practice. It's probably the same amount of patients of £1 million of private revenue. So kind of putting it in your head, it's kind of much more painful to service NHS, plus it's incongruous with your offering. So it's not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's kind of like, you know, I've come in for a sandwich and you're trying to sell me Chateaubriand. It doesn't fit together. So it's definitely more of a challenge now than it ever was. And I think, Simon, I'm right in saying that kind of record numbers of people are just leaving the NHS and kind of looking to go fully private at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, as you touched on, Dan, you know, we've got a viability analysis process that we can gladly go through with anyone without any obligation, that in essence just takes what the current situation looks like with servicing that NHS contract and what that would look like in a private capacity, taking it into account, you know, the volume of exempts, kids, adults, the split of UDAs between clinicians, UDA value. And generally speaking, it's most people are very surprised at the low volume of patients that you actually need to retain to make that transition a bit of a no-brainer. I think the challenge and why, and you're right, we've seen such a spike in that demand over the last sort of 2-3 years. I think the reason why there's perhaps not even more people going is because it's that psychological element of just getting a chunk of money, and whether that's profitable or not, I think it's a hard thing for some people to let go because they just see it as that security. I think the other thing to factor in here is that, you know, the NHS and the principles of it and what that actually offers, you know, the people of the UK is access to an amazing service. And I think a lot of dentists potentially, you know, feel that are almost obliged to sort of, you know, offer that and get a lot out of it in terms of, what the NHS stands for. But unfortunately, as with a lot of things in life, it comes down to, you know, pounds, shillings and pence. And I think without any fundamental changes, then making it really, really challenging for people to make NHS dentistry commercially viable.
Definitely.
Perfect. We do have a couple more questions. I'm just conscious of timings.
I've just looked at them. So hygienists pay tend to just pay an hourly rate, or if you can get 30 or 35%. But I'd be thinking more about how you're charging out their time and how much they're delivering in what time as well. So I'd be looking at effectiveness rather than pay rate more so. Offshoring a TCO, drop me an email, dan.fine@hivebusiness. We could discuss it. Very early days. It's just a few clients are trialing it. It could be could be good, could not be good. Associates who grow slow, if they're clinically good, what do you do with them? It's a long road. If you think they've got the capability to do it, the problem you're working against is the commercial outcome for them is fantastic. Whether or not they gross £1,000 or £2,000, they get paid 40 to 50%. Well, 40 to 45%. If you're paying 50%, that's wrong. But that's another conversation. So I would, look at a load of random x-rays they took the previous month and go through them with them and say, oh, you chose not to put a crown here when, I would have done it there. So it's a long road. I'd recommend going on communication courses. Justin Lee, Ashley Latter, Barry, all of those guys are really, really useful, and it's information that you should know. But it's like, as much as you can throw at it, if you're happy with them clinically and think they're a good, ultimately going to be a good egg, it's a big training job ahead of you. But yeah, the downsides for them of underperforming are actually quite low because associates are paid so much.
Perfect. Thank
Cool.
you.
And yeah. So Simon, this is one for you.
Yeah, a little bit of the bonus focus. So I'm very conscious of time, and
sorry,
Jonathan. Yeah, no, not all. It's all been really good content. I hope everybody's got a lot out of that. Yeah, look, before we just segue into all of that and how that impacts on locking in that future value and thinking about that exit down the line, I just wanted to share a little bit of insight as to what's going on in the market currently. And if you do offer a plan with with ourselves or with another plan provider, a means of reducing your plan costs potentially without doing anything, or with doing something. So very, very briefly, there was a change in the market about 3 years ago now, where there is now a facility. If you want to switch plan provider, you can utilize what's called the bulk transfer process. So in essence, we can move the existing direct debits from a provider to another provider in the background. And what that means is that it's created a much more open market. People don't feel tied to a plan provider because of fear of change and a cumbersome process and potential patient drop off. And what that's done is put pressure on different providers to express value in what they do. And clearly, as a cost saving proposition in the market, that's what we are. So we identify as the most cost-effective major plan provider. So switching from the likes of a DEM plan or practice plan could stand to save your practice a significant amount of money. And what we found particularly with a couple of providers, is that their retention strategies seem to be to throw money at the situation. So we are coming across practices that are getting golden handshakes of pretty significant amounts of money and fee reductions just at the threat of moving away. And we feel as a provider that it's got to a point where we should educate the market. We should make people aware of this, because if you're a loyal customer to that plan provider and somebody down the road is having a bit of a moan and a grumble and getting, in essence, a reduction in their admin fees and also a lump sum as well, I don't know how that might sit with you. And so what I would encourage you to do is, if you do work with another plan provider, feel free to have a chat with us. We can put a little bit more meat around the bones as to what's going on there. And we can also show you how we've worked with practices. And I know, Dan, thank you so much for, and Jonathan as well, some of the referrals that you've made to us. And we've been able to, save some practices quite a lot of money. And those practices have the long term in mind and perhaps aren't blinded by a sort of deal in the here and now, or a lump sum that doesn't actually equate to savings in the long term. And Dan, as you touched on before, if a practice can save 5, 10, 15 grand by switching to a more cost effective option in a market when we've just touched on that, commercial control and cost analysis is so important, then that can multiply out by quite a significant amount when you are coming to exit, which I think leads nicely onto Jonathan and from Christie and Co, and just to share a little bit more about how that all comes together and locking in that value in the long term.
Thanks. We do just have one question in the chat box for you, just before we move on, just whilst we're transitioning to Jonathan's slides. I'm not sure if you can see it, I can read it out. I was told by a very experienced principal that Denplan is the Ferrari of dental plans. Sell me practice plan. Cost per patient is not the only thing that sells for me. I pay privately for my children's education, so price is not what I personally look at.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point. And yeah, I think anything is about a cost benefit analysis. And I think that's the beauty of having a competitive marketplace as well, and different options in the market. I would say we identify as a value proposition rather than, you know, a cheap and cheerful low cost proposition. But yeah, look, there's definitely people out there that are going to think that Denplan is the Ferrari of dental plans. There's others that are going to think another provider's the best things in sliced bread, and there's people who think we're great as a plan provider. So yeah, that's just the nature of an open market, and having different options that work for different people.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Simon.
No worries.
Hopefully you can see those slides, everyone.
Yeah, perfect.
So yeah, just a little bit conscious of time, so I'll have a bit of a whiz through a sort of a market update, and then just touching on practice profitability and values, which leads on from what Dan and Simon have been talking about. Slide shows the breakdown of practice ownership in England and Wales. So I think there's a bit of a perception that the corporates have gone out there and bought all the practices, but you can see from the numbers on the left there, they only account for about 18% of the market. So we've still got over 10,000 practices in independent ownership. And then there's a bit of a breakdown on the right of some of those corporates and how many practice numbers they've got. A lot of this information has come from our recent dental market review document, which hopefully some people have seen. We've sort of put it out everywhere, but if anyone hasn't seen it, I'm happy to share a copy afterwards. I'm just sort of running through a few of the stats we've got from that. But sort of My Dentist and Boop are still leading the way. Obviously haven't been the most acquisitive in the market in recent years. We've now got the sort of newly merged Portman Dentex hot on the heels, and Roderick's Dental Partners as well, who have also merged in the last 18 months. So bit of a change in landscape, but as I say, still 10,000 practices in independent ownership with sort of single practice owners and smaller groups. So this slide just sort of shows a little bit about market dynamics and the percentage of offers, and what type of practices people are looking for, really. I mean, I talked about those mergers. There's obviously been a lot of integration in the sort of big four corporates. So this chart shows we only saw last year 18% of practices bought by corporates, which really demonstrates that sort of trend I mentioned. We did see a reduction in practice sales as a result last year. The chart on the right showing typically we see about 700 transactions in the market. 700 practices available for sale. Right now we're seeing around 500 across all the agents. So I think, you know, there's been a slight reduction in the last 18 months as a result of that sort of cost of borrowing and corporate slowdown of activity. And we were fortunate last year as a firm with a number of corporate disposal programs, which I'll talk about in a moment. But sorry, just going to add on there. But 61% of practices that we sold last year have been to first-time buyers and independents. So obviously, really sort of strong numbers in the independent market. And then just a real brief sort of overview of offer activity. Obviously, I mentioned there's been a bit of a slowdown in the last 18 months. This sort of shows offers and viewing levels. But really sort of takeaway is that Q1 in 2024 and Q2 recently, we're seeing that spike up, lots of viewings, lots of offers. And we're seeing a bit of a bounce back from a tougher year in the market last year. So this slide shows the sort of what practices, what type of practices people are buying, and I think the sort of major trend has been what the corporates are buying, as I've mentioned. I think if you look at the end of the third bar on the 2023 slide, and also the third bar on the 24 slide there on the right, chart on the right there, you can see that corporates have all but sort of pulled out of NHS practices, and certainly been concentrated on both integration and periods of consolidation, but also have clearly shifted to the private market. But I think the interesting one, as I mentioned before, is that sort of third chart from the right, in that first-time buyers and independents were 61% of first-time buyers, and smaller groups are still looking at mixed practices. So there's absolutely, you know, whilst we're seeing the corporates pull away from NHS dentistry, there's absolutely buyers for your NHS practices. Notwithstanding what Dan and Simon said earlier about a lot of people choosing to convert because of the issues with recruitment, retention of dentists, a lot of obviously NHS dentists sort of moving to the private sector, but there are still lots of buyers, particularly those smaller NHS practices where a first-time buyer can acquire the practice, go in there, deliver a load of the UDAs themselves. But I think it's fair to say there's been a big sort of shift to the recent years. So this chart shows the average EBITDA multiples paid across the country. And just to quickly explain them, the chart on the left is owner-operated practices. So that's where we assume there's an owner-operator delivering maybe 7,500 UDAs or 250 to 300,000 pounds of private revenue, and which is obviously, because they're delivering that income themselves, it produces a higher profit, and we apply a lower multiple of sort of 3 to 4 times. And you can see the spread of multiples on that sort of pink graph on the left. I think what I'd say, there are some, I mean, we tried to capture whole regions like the Northwest. We've obviously got rural locations, smaller practices. We've got city centre practices in there, Manchester, the Lake District, or somewhere. So obviously it's a blended multiple across the regions, but generally we're still seeing higher multiples paid in Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, London, of course. So those bigger towns and cities. And then the chart on the right is associate-led practices, so where we assume all of the dentist is carried out by associates. Even if there is a principal delivering significant income, we'll sort of factor them back in, work and calculate what it would cost to replace them. And obviously paying out for the full delivery cost, it produces a lower profit, to which we apply a multiple, which is typically between 7 and 8 times, depending on the type of practice, the location, and the risk. And you can sort of get an idea for the spread of multiples. So I think the interesting thing here is, I could have seen exactly the same graph 3, 4, 5 years ago. I think the main thing is the multiples are, very similar. Mentions there on the right that multiples have dropped by 6%, but in the scheme of things and what we've been through the last few years and the cost of borrowing at the moment, the multiples really have plateaued, and it's not multiples of profit that's affecting that perceived reduction in practice values. It's why we're here tonight. It's practice profitability, and that's been a big change. Just to illustrate that, and Dan sort of touched on quite a few of these points earlier, we sort of saw lab and material costs, according to our data, was anything between 9 and 13% typically of revenue the last few years. We're now seeing that as high as 15%. Obviously, you'll get a high-end private practice doing loads of implants and Invisalign, and it sort of far exceeds 15. But as an average, bear in mind we've got NHS practices in there and some planned practices in there with lower lab bills. We're seeing that sort of spend now. Light and heat, obviously, has been well documented, has almost doubled in terms of the cost there. And as Dan mentioned again, that those staffing costs have pushed forwards. As I say, we've got a right sort of blend of practices through there. Historically, at 14%, now looking like 18%. That's staffing costs excluding clinicians. But in some cases, we're seeing staffing where we've got a larger practice, say with a manager, assistant manager, TCO, and we're seeing those costs rise to 25, occasionally 30% in some extreme cases, but regularly in that sort of 20 to 25 bracket. So that's been the big sort of change, I think, in valuation. And then what sort of knock-on effect has that had on profit? Well, you'll see there that associate-led profits, which we'd often see at sort of 20-25%, in some sort of very good cases, now dropping to around 15-16%, where we're not looking at profitability, where we're not sort of looking at those costs, as Dan mentioned. And then as an owner-operator practice, we would regularly see practices with sort of, we've got 33 there as sort of pre-COVID, but in some cases, and some of those mixed practices, we'd sometimes see sort of owners profit up at 40% plus, and now we're sort of regularly seeing 30. So that's been the big change. And just to do a really quick example of that, I've just done a quick owner-operated model. So if we've got a practice here delivering 700k of revenue, so that's the turnover, with a 40% EBITDA margin. This is in the sort of days that we mentioned earlier where profitability was high, costs were relatively low, EBITDA of 280k, taking an owner's multiple of 4 times, that would deliver a sale price of 1.12 million, which, as the sort of old rule of thumb, pence in the pound, would deliver 160% of revenue would be your sale price. And just to use a little demonstration of a 30% EBITDA margin on the same practice, that 10% EBITDA margin now returns a sale price of 840k, which is only 120% of revenue, which is obviously a big jump. And just really quickly show how that works on an associate-led model. If we've got a practice in 1.5 million pounds of turnover with a really nice 25% EBITDA margin, producing a profit of 375 at a 7 times multiple, we're getting over 2.6 million pound sale price, which a real healthy 175% of turnover. But taking a sort of extreme view, but what we're seeing really regularly, as we've sort of described earlier in the presentation, taking a 15% margin obviously only gets you to 225, and we're over £1 million lighter on the sale price, which is huge. Sort of life-changing alteration there. We're just getting over pound for pound, 105% of revenue there. So that, yes, it's an extreme example, but it is absolutely typical of what we see, where we can see margins going from 20-25% regularly down to sort of 10-15%. So a bit about how we sort of avoid that and how we make the practice more profitable, which I appreciate was what's particularly Dan covered earlier. So I'll sort of keep it brief. But I think the main thing is take the advice early. Too many people come to us, and all of us, but particularly agents, and say, I've had enough, I want to sell. I think take the advice early, speak to your accountant, speak to your agent, even before you're anywhere near selling. Take some free advice and spot these things. So we talked about sort of land materials earlier, but I think just, are we spending too much on implants? Are we not charging enough on implants, for instance? These are all things we can work on with accountant, business coach, and that sort of work on these costs. And then I think Simon's point as well on plan fees. I appreciate we had someone say that it's not all about cost, it is about the service, and that's true. But equally, that £15,000 saving on a real sort of busy plan practice would return, over £100,000 on the sale price. And us as agents, we don't touch things like plan admin fees. We don't tend to touch marketing, advertising spend, because we see it directly contributing to revenue. So, as I say, those things are typically getting left in your business valuation. So anything you can work on your accountant is really important. And as I say, just having a joined up plan, having a solicitor on board early, speaking to your wealth manager, financial advisors as well, who can sort of find out exactly when's the right time for you to sell, how much you need. You might find you need more and you need less. So just having that sort of joined up planning, I think is really important. And I think something that has become, when you sort of find it is time to sell, something that has been more important than ever before is having good quality data. And there's loads and loads of sort of banks out there lending. There's really good appetite still for dentistry. It's a green light sector compared to a lot of sort of struggling high street sort of lending at the moment. There's a lot of appetite still for dentistry, but the banks need lots of data. They need sort of live data. They need management accounts. You can't just get away with sending a set of accounts that was prepared 18 months ago, which used to be the case. So having a firm like Hive on board who produce high quality live data, monthly management accounts, having those through a sale process is invaluable. And it will mean that the banking process, the sort of credit sanction will happen really quickly because we've got good quality data. So really important to have that on board. I don't know if Dan, you want to mention anything on that about sort of cloud accounting or anything, but that's been a real change recently.
Yeah, I mean, it's even after funding's been agreed, there's the whole due diligence process as well, which easily 10 or 15% can come off the headline price if you haven't got data in line. So you know, we do our best at Hive to try and have all zeros up to date at all times, and I won't pretend that we managed to do it, but we've got a dedicated team, because without that data, we can't help you kind of sell your practice, but equally we can't help you tax plan in real time or anything like that. So it's kind of a core tenet of what we do. A bit like you probably don't do dentistry on someone who hasn't had the hygiene done. We believe the zero and that being in line is your dental hygiene. So yeah, it's a fundamental tenet of what we do.
Yeah, and I think the last couple points on there, we just run everything in tandem, sort of applying for enhanced DBS checks, CQC applications. Don't wait until due diligence is done to start there, and you've just got to do everything, sort of meet it head on right at the start, taking advice from your advisors, and communicate. I think that's the other points of a sale.
Yeah, we've just got a question that's come up. So how can you define good data? Is there a way to get monthly snapshot of your practice value? I bought my practice through Christie's and they were top class.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, look, I think the point there is the monthly management accounts. You know, as I said, we used to handle a practice sale, and we'd have, you know, it's taken a few months to produce the accounts after the financial year end, and then we've got accounts that are suddenly 15 months out to date, and there used to be such appetite from the banks that they'd take a bit of a view on that. And I think in sort of post-COVID, and then particularly post the sort of miniature sort of financial recession we've found ourselves in, I think banks, as I say, still lending, but just requires so much more data. They want, if we're sort of sat in September now, they want to know what the revenue's been since that March year end. So I think it's just having that live monthly management accounts is the point.
Yeah, and if you've got that, you don't know a live value, but you have a feel for it, is probably what I'd say. So if your zero's up to date, you are getting that kind of management information, so you have a true understanding of the EBITDA and areas where you can improve it. You have a feel for the value of your practice every day. We have a good relationship with Christie and Co, so it's almost like we think it's worth it, even if you're not sure about selling. If it's worth having a chat with the guys, and they'll give an opinion, and then from there, that kind of gives you the groundwork to appraise how to move forward.
I think that's it, because this obviously, as a lot of people will know, if you're selling to a group operator or certainly a corporate, and you've got a particular sort of high proportion of revenue is private, but even if it's a mixed practice, you know that the corporate is probably going to ask you to remain in position as an associate for 2, 3 to 5 years. So I think it's just take that advice really, really early. As I say, we don't charge for an appraisal. We'll come and meet with you at the practice. Happy to work with accountants and your accountants or business coach at an early stage, and sort of review the figures year on year, and just get to that point where finally we're ready, we've timed it, and then you'll hit the button. But as I say, there's so much we can spot at that early stage before you're ready to come to market. I just put a couple of recent case studies up there, which hopefully you've had just a quick chance to look through as we've been talking. But I think just worth mentioning the sale of 44 Bupa practices, which we handled last year, and it's just a fantastic project to be part of. So we've got 11 officers, and every agent jumped on it and handled the sale. But the main sort of takeaway was they all went to independent operators. Most of them were first-time buyers. Quite a lot of the practice associates, in fact, existing practice associates in those practices, end up buying the practices they were working in. So, which made it sort of a nice transition. But yeah, landmark sale last year. All 44 practices were sold. And I think, running over, that is me. So happy to take any questions, or we can follow up after.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. We don't currently have any questions, but obviously if anyone thinks of any questions afterwards, then I will be reaching out over the coming days to offer complimentary consultations, whether that's with Hive, Christie & Co, or Patient Plan Direct. Let me know and we can certainly liaise that. I can liaise with them for you, and we can get those booked in to suit your schedules. And obviously any further questions that you have, ping them our way and we can filter through them